Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the Latin alphabet and its pronunciation. Now this is something that I always start with my Latin classes right from day one. What does the Latin alphabet look like and how do we pronounce it? Because it's really important that you think of this as a language and not just something that you're reading. You can speak it, you should speak Latin, you can listen to it, all these things. It's a living, breathing language, right? Just because there's not a lot of people speaking it anymore, right? The Romans are pretty long dead and they've morphed into new things. That doesn't mean that we can't figure out what it sounded like and how to pronounce it. So it's really important as you go on your Latin journey to work through it and make sure that every once in a while you're kind of doing a little bit of review on it. So this is the Latin alphabet. If you're just starting out, this is what it looks like. And the letters should look really familiar. We have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, we're skipping J, and we'll talk about how J and I are related to each other, right? Basically the same thing. Then you have K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, V, right? The U and the V, you'll notice are together. We'll talk about that. Then X, Y, Z. So again, there's a W missing, and we'll talk about where that shows up to. So basically, it's the same thing that we've seen before, right? If you speak English, it should look really familiar. If you speak other languages, like the Romance languages, a lot of languages are using this Latin alphabet. It should feel really familiar to you. The trick, though, is how are these letters pronounced and how are they used? And that's what we want to dive into in this video. So let's take a look at them individually. The first letter we want to look at is A, the vowel A, right? And the thing you want to understand about vowels in Latin is that they have long and short versions of themselves. So a long vowel has a macron on top of it, right? It comes from the Greek word for big, right? Big, long, same idea. So when you're looking here, it's that line over the A. That's called the macron. So the long A is on the left and the short A is on the right. Now, if you've studied English before, you might remember maybe in grade school, you learned about long and short vowels too in English. You might not have thought about it in a while because if you can speak English pretty well, it's not anything you really need to worry about. But in case you haven't really thought about it, there are different ways to pronounce vowels and letters in English, and the same thing happens in Latin. So if you're looking at a long A, right, the sound it makes is ah. So you want to think about the word father, right? So father has an A in it. The short A sound is more like the A in area. At the end, it's the sound. So it's the difference between and So the letter is the same in English, right? The A in father and the A in area, but they make different sounds. That's what's going on here in the Latin too. So if you look in the green down below, the long A, right, would be mater, M-A-T-E-R with the long A. The short A would be like the A in cella, right? So it's mater, cella, The and are two different sounds. That's the long and the short A. Next, we have the letter C, right? So the letter C is the Latin form of the Greek kappa, which is a K. So it always makes a k sound, right? A hard sound. So it's a consonant, so you want to think of it that way. It always makes the sound like the C in cake, right? And never like the way some people pronounce Caesar, right, is the traditional pronunciation in English. That C in Caesar makes like a S sound. That's not how it works. And it's not a ch either. Sometimes people want to make it a ch sound. That's not it. It's a k. So when you look at the name Caesar in English, in Latin, it's pronounced Kaiser, right? Which is why you get in German Kaiser, right? And then when you get into Russian, you get Tsar. There's different kind of versions of this, but the German one kind of gives you the idea. It's spelled with a K. That's the sound you're looking for, a k sound. Next, we want to look at the vowel E. So again, with vowels, we have long and short sounds. On the left, you have the long E. That makes the sound of the E in they and bake. It's an A sound, right? So in Latin, we'd say manere, right? That green word below, it's an A sound. The short E is the E like in net and let. It's an sound, right? Or bet is another one. So it's the difference between A and right? So again, down below in Latin, you have manere, long E, and mitere, short E, the sound, right? Like in net or let. So they're making two different sounds. Next, we have the G. The consonant G in Latin is the form of the Greek gamma. It makes a G sound like gamma. So it's always hard. So think of the English word get, right? G. It's never a J sound, right? In English, you can say gentle, and the G is really acting like a J. It's not going to do that in Latin. So you're never going to see a pronunciation of J. It's always G. So down below in green, we have two Latin words. We have gains and fugere. Right? They're both G sounds. So that first one is not Janes, it's gains, right? G is the sound that the G makes. Next, we have the vowel I. So the long vowel, right, the long I makes a sound like the EA in clean. It's an E sound. So down below you have dico, right? The long I is an E sound. The short I is like the I in pin or win, right? It's an sound, so you have digitus down below, right? So it's the difference between dico and digitus. They're making different sounds. Next, you have this idea of what we can use the I for. So when you take an I with a vowel in Latin, it's really making a Y sound like the Y in the English word yes. So if you look in green, you have I-A-M. That's pronounced yam, right? So it's because you have that I followed by a vowel. It makes a y sound. Later on, you're going to see that the consonantal form of I became the English J. So I and J are actually related to each other, which is why they look the same. Next, we have the letter N. So the letter N, the consonant N, it makes the same sound as in English. It's a N sound, right? But one thing you want to understand about it is that when you have an N before the letters C, G, or X, it makes a sound like an NG in English. So think of the word hang in English. It's making an ng sound, right? So down below in Latin, we have longus, winco, and phalanx, right? The ngs sound in phalanx, right? My pronunciation is probably terrible, but you're getting the idea. It's got that sort of NG-ish quality to it. So you want to think about that when you go. And whenever you see an N followed by one of these letters, think about that pronunciation. Next, we have the vowel O. So the long O sounds like the O in the English word note, right? It's where you get nomen, right? It's the O sound, note. The short O sounds like the O in obvious. It's an sound. So it's the difference between note and obvious. In Latin, it would be the difference between nomen and omnis, right? They're making two different sounds again. Now we have the R. The thing you want to know about the Latin R is that you roll it on the tip of your tongue. A lot of Romance languages do this, and it's something that I struggle with. But when you say that word Roma, right, you want to try to roll the R better than I can do. But it definitely has that rolled sound to it. So when you practice it or read it out loud, try rolling your R's and see if you can get good at it. Next, we want to look at the letter S. Again, the consonant S has two different ways of really saying it in English. So you always want to pronounce it with the hiss effect, right? Like the word so in English. Sometimes we have the letter S pronounced like a Z. So think of the word knows. If you say, oh, he knows, right? Sometimes we make that final S sound like a Z. That's not happening in Latin. It's always going to have the S sound. So the word down below is herbs, right? It's got the S, not really the Z sound. If you can distinguish between the two of those, you'll catch on what the Latin should sound like. Next, we have the consonant T. So T is always a hard sound, right? Like the word tin or tough in English. It's making a T sound. It's never a sh sound. Sometimes in English, we make it that. Like if you think of the word ration, right? That sh sound comes from the T followed by the I. That's not happening in Latin, right? That word in Latin would be ratio, right? It's a TIO, or at least a form of it. So down below, we have some other Latin words using that T. It's tempus and oratio, right? In English, you might say an oration, but in Latin, it's oratio. It's always a hard T sound. Next, we have the V and the U. So V and U are just different forms of the same thing. The V is the consonantal form, and the U is the vowel form. The V is really pronounced like a W in Latin. So if you're thinking of the word wine, right, that W sound is what V sounds like, w. It's never a V like vacation, right? So in English, we always have two different ways of doing it, two different letters, W and V. In Latin, the V is making that W sound. So when you look down below and see vinum, that's vinum in Latin, right? And you can see how they're related because vinum means wine. And in English, we use the W, wine. We also have, and this shows up in a lot of different videos on pronunciation, the famous quote of Julius Caesar, right? Anyone who's taken Latin can usually rattle this quote off. And a lot of people will say veni, vidi, vici, right? In traditional Latin, though, classical Latin, this is veni, vidi, vici, right? It's a w sound. So that's what you want to think about if you're thinking about Julius Caesar's famous quote. Next, we have the vowel U. So the long U sounds like the U in rule. It's an oo sound. The short U sounds like the U in full. So it's the difference between, in Latin, luna and dux, right? It's not dux. It's not a long U. It's a short one. And the same, the word moon is not luna. It's luna, right? So think of rule and full, and you'll hear the different ways that we pronounce the letter U in Latin. So next we have the letter X. And the thing you want to remember about X in Latin is that X is really a combination of K and S together. They make a ks sound, right? That's where we get X. You can hear it in the name. Sometimes in English, we make it sound like a Z, like the word Xerox, right? The first X in Xerox has a Z sound. It never does that, right? So you always want to think of like T-Rex, think of your dinosaurs. That ks sound is always what you want to do when you see an X in Latin. So in green, we have the Latin word weaksit, right? It makes a ks sound, the X in the middle. It's not a particularly difficult thing to keep track of, but just make sure you think of it every time you see the letter X. And lastly, we have the letter Z, which really doesn't show up a lot in Latin. But when it does, you can think of the pronunciation almost like modern Italian, a D and a Z together. So you would pronounce that word gazza, right? It's got that D and Z together. Again, we don't see a ton of Latin words with the Z, but if you run into one, that's really what you're going for in terms of pronunciation. So now we want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Greek letters that are borrowed in Latin. So you see these occasionally. There are a decent amount of Greek words that come right into Latin, and they maintain these Greek letters. So the way you can spot easily a Greek loanword is by using these letter combinations, right? So PH, CH, TH, and RH. These are Greek letters that come right into Latin. The trick here is that the H is really not a letter. H is a breathing sound. Right? So in Greek, you either let out that puff of air or you don't, right? You either include the H or you don't. So it's really just air kind of puffing out of your mouth. So a lot of times it was omitted, or you would actually make that puff of air after you do the initial consonant. So in Latin, you see words like philosophia, right? When you're saying that, we're going to see in a second, you're really borrowing that Greek letter and letting a little puff of air out of your mouth. So what does it look like? It looks like this, or it sounds like this rather. When you see the PH, think of the PH combination, the word chop house. When you say chop house, you can hear the H coming out of your mouth, right? You don't say choff house. That's not how we pronounce it, right? It's chop house. It's a P sound. The CH is sort of like the English word workhorse. When you say that, again, remember C and K are the same thing. It's that K sound, right? A little puff of air comes out of your mouth, workhorse. Same with TH. Think of the word hothead. When you say someone is a hothead, it's not hothead, right? You don't make it a th sound. It's almost like a T with a little puff of air after it. When you have the RH, it's probably best to pretend that there's no H there at all. So, right, the famous name Rhea Silvia, right? You can pronounce that as Rhea, right? But there is a little kind of puff of air coming out of your mouth, or just pretend the H isn't there. And again, we see these different Greek letters when you run into either Greek names or words that are borrowed out of Greek directly into Latin. So the other thing you really need to talk about when you're discussing Latin pronunciation are diphthongs, right? So these are special vowel combinations that create unique sounds. You can't do this with just any combination of vowels. There's only certain ones that do this. But the ones that we have in Latin are AE, AU, OE, EU, and UI. So what do they look like and sound like? Well, when you see an AE in Latin, it sounds like the AI in aisle. So in Latin, we'd pronounce that word paine, right? It's an I sound. The AU makes it sound like ow, like ouch, right? So when you start that word in Latin in green, it's audio, right? It's an ow sound. The OE makes it sound like the OI in boil or oil. It's an oi sound. So in Latin, we have poina. The EU is very tricky. We can't really replicate this so well in English, or so easily in English, I should say. It sounds like a short E and a short U right after each other. So an AU type sound. So that word over to the right is ahu, right? It's sort of a AU, right? And it's tricky to do in English, but try your best to get, that combination. You'll be okay. You don't see it a ton, but it does show up a little bit. And lastly, we have the UI. That UI sound makes the same sound as the UI in quick. It's a wh sound. So over to the right in green, we have quick, right? So if you think of the word quick, that's a pretty good replication of what you're seeing. The last diphthong that we have is EI. So in Latin, EI makes an A sound like the English word neighbor. So in Latin, the word in green would be dende. So now we're ready for some practice. And this is where I'd encourage you to pause the video, take a look at these words, and try to pronounce them on your own. Then, when you feel like you've gotten the hang of it, come back, play the video, and listen to the pronunciation, and hopefully you're on the right track. But going down the columns, the first column on the left, we have Karai, Kiwis, Julius, Sedes, Laudo, and Sed. Down the middle column, we have Gloria, Quoque, Mores, Seu, Posuises, and Sumo. And the last column on the right, we have Dende, Huius, Justus, Mixtum, sicca, and sum. So if your pronunciation was pretty close to that, you're on the right track. And remember, don't let anyone tell you your pronunciation is bad. Try it however you can and practice it to get better, but don't be discouraged by your pronunciation, right? There's a lot of people who claim to be experts out there, and I'm sure they're doing great things, but that should never discourage you from trying to speak this language. It's a language. It's designed to be spoken. People spoke it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. You can too. So keep practicing it and make sure that when you read Latin, whatever Latin you're looking at or whatever textbook you're looking at, that you're trying your best to do the best pronunciation that you can. It'll really help you unpack what this language sounds like and how it impacts other languages like the Romance languages or English. So always give it your best shot.